class is all about sanding. We've already taken care of cutting the metal, we've already taken care of our side edges by filing, and now we're ready to take care of the fronts and backs of the surface. So we're gonna take our little piece. The edges are nice and clean now. We've filed the inside and outside, and now we're ready to take care of this front side of the surface. So sanding is pretty simple. There's a few different rules, but sometimes you break the rules too. So the first thing you're gonna need to have is some sandpaper. And I've got 3 different grits of sandpaper. I've got a coarse grit. This one is a wet dry paper, and it's a 150 grit. It's not important that you have the exact same grit as what I have, but something around there in that general area is great. So this is a 150. And then my medium grit is a 600. And this is also, all of these are wet dry papers, so that means they can be sanded both dry and wet. And then this is a 2000. This is my finest grit sandpaper, and we're gonna go in that order. So we're gonna be using the coarse grit first, then the medium, and then the fine grit. And then finally, we'll actually use the fine grit wet as well. So some things you wanna think about when you're sanding, some of the rules per se, is you want to establish which side is the front and which side is the back. This could just be because it has to go a certain way. If you have a piece like this that really it could go either way, you might look at, which side looks better. Is there a side that you think has less scratches on it to begin with? That might be your best front side. So you're always going to sand the back first. So we'll start with the back and we'll end with the front. And the reason for that is because as you're sanding, no matter how careful you are, you end up when you're sanding the front, it gets little scratches on the back. So we want the back to be the one with more scratches. If we're gonna have any imperfections, we want it to be on the back. So I'll show you a little closer the process. So I've got my 2 pieces that are going to be earrings here. And I've looked at them and decided that these are going to be my backs. So I'm going to be sanding the back first. I'll start with the roughest grit, my 150, and this is dry. I like to fold the paper in half. I don't know, it just gives me a little something more to hold on to, and I'm going to move this one out of the way. I also don't want to ever sand on a hard surface. So I have a little pad of newspaper that I've folded up a few times to make sure that I have a little bit of a softer kind of cushioned surface. A piece of cardboard could also work for this. You just don't want to work on a tabletop, especially one like this that is all dinged up, because as you're applying force to the top of this metal, you could be scratching up the bottom if you have a rough surface underneath you. So I'll make sure that there's no sand and dust on my paper. I've got my pad, and I'll fold it up, and then I kind of use my finger to press this sandpaper on. One thing you'll want to do is try to go all in the same direction, whatever direction you choose, for the first round. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of go at an angle back and forth, and I can already see that the sandpaper is making a huge difference. It's taking off tarnish. This coarse grit is going to take off the big scratches, and I am pushing pretty hard and holding my metal with my other hand as I sand. This rough grit is also going to make sort of a sheet of lines all going in one direction. When I start to get a bunch of dust, I'm gonna get that off because that could be scratching up the back if I'm not careful. So I'll get that off, and then I'm gonna keep going. Same direction. I'm kind of working at a diagonal here. And I'm trying to hit the spots that I see I didn't get. Or if I see any big scratches, I'm gonna try to get those some more. So that looks pretty good. One more time over the whole thing in that direction. And then the next thing I'm going to do is cross that direction. So if I was going in a diagonal this way, I'm now gonna go in the opposite direction. So I'm actually gonna flip my piece around and go against the grain that I just made. So I'm still working with the rough grit. It's hard to hold on to these little pieces. But you can do it. So let's see if I've gotten everything. Now where you might have to break the rule is if you like can't get into a spot, or there's just one little spot that's tough, dented in, hard to get to, you can get that spot by going a different direction or going around in a circle or whatever it takes to get it, and then just go over it again with the same direction that you were going with the rest of it. So once I've gotten the coarse grit, and I'm working on the back, I'm gonna switch this paper now, and I'll grab the medium grit, fold this in half, and also know that like if you wear down certain parts, you can move to a new part of your paper. So you can fold it a different way. So this paper can be used multiple times for multiple pieces until it's just entirely worn away. So this one I'll go one direction. And this paper will start to refine and smooth out even those fine lines that my first coarse grit was making. So I've gotten it all sanded in one direction. Go over it one more time, same direction, until I make sure I'm not seeing any big lines anymore, and it's starting to smooth out. Now I went side to side on this one, so I'm gonna go vertical. Same grit, both directions. So you're always taking the sandpaper over in two directions. And there's a little spot that's hard to get, so I'm gonna make a nice ridge with my paper and try to get right along that edge right there. And then same direction on this side. And I'll take a look at that and see how it's looking. And then I will do the same thing with my fine grit. So I'll grab my 2000 and fold that up, and I'll go my two different directions. So this one will be the finest. It'll start to really buff things out, start to shine it up a little. It's not gonna have that shiny polished finish yet. That's something we do when we polish. So get it all sanded. Now some people will purposely not do this, technical sanding where you're crisscrossing and removing all the lines to get it smooth. Some people will purposely sand in circles or sand in, zigzags or diagonals, and maybe they won't go through all the grits because they want to have a texture there. For this one, I really want this to get really smooth and a high shine. So I'll go in the opposite direction. And this will be sort of a satin finish when I'm done with it. I'm gonna get the bottom again, and then just take a peek at this one and see how it's looking. And then compared to the back, I can still see, which is actually the front, I can still see I haven't taken care of this. I've got a lot of scratches still. So that's the difference. So I'll go ahead and flip it now and do that same process dry with the front side. So I've done both sides of this, but now that I'm looking at it, I want to go through this process again. And I think maybe I can show you, I can see some scuffs still in here. This is just a little hard section to get, and I really want to get that spot right there on the front, and I still see some work I want to do on the back. So I'm actually going to go through this one more time, which happens a lot. Oftentimes if you get it and you're crisscrossing both sandpaper or all the 3 sandpaper grits, if you're crisscrossing in both directions, usually that's enough. But very rarely and occasionally, I guess I shouldn't say very rarely, it happens that you'll want to go through it again just to get anything you missed. So I'm going to go through this one again and I'll show you when I'm finished. So now that I have this piece sanded with through all 3 grits dry, I'm going to take my last sandpaper grit, the 2000, and my piece, and this would be the time where I'd probably just go over to the sink and get them both wet, run them under the sink, hold on to them, sand them, rinse them again, and sand them again. Since I'm not at the sink, I went ahead and brought a bucket over of water, and I'm just gonna dip this into my bowl of water. So I'll dip my piece as well as my paper and get them both nice and wet. So I'm going to take my sandpaper, and this is just with the finest grit, and I'm just gonna go over this one last time on the back and the front, but notice I'm just holding it in my hand because really I'm just wanting to not scratch this up at all again. Now be careful you're not bending your piece, support it well, go both directions if you can, and just look for any little nicks or scratches that you still see in this piece. And this is just the final refining of this surface. And then I think I'll dip it again in here and I will get it wet and do the other side. So just add more water. Now this paper I can let dry out and I can use it again, dry, and it'll be just fine. So no need to throw that wet paper away. Just let it sit out and dry. And then you can keep using this for a few more pieces, excuse me, until you've really worn out the paper. So just take in one last look. All right, that looks pretty good. So now I'll just set this paper aside. I'm gonna give this a little rinse and I'll grab a paper towel. I'm gonna dry off my piece and we'll take a look at the finished sanded piece. And then let's actually look at it next to the piece that I haven't sanded yet. So see what a difference that makes? See how much more refined this piece is. So that's what we're looking for. Our next step will be putting this in the tumbler. If you don't have a tumbler and you're working from home, you can skip that step. Just make sure you sand really well. We're lucky to have that tumbler, which just smooths things out, gives it a little shine. And we'll put it in there for an hour or two. Sometimes I even put them in and let them run all day. And then we'll polish this up. So in the next video, I'll show you how to work the tumbler and how to polish. There you go, sanding complete.